Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome George Birnbaum from GEB International.
All right, good afternoon. Words like radical and extreme and fringe. Well, you know, I was, back in the mid-'80s, I was probably one of the only Jewish conservatives out there. And, you know, I was, by my own friends, was called an extremist and a radical and on the fringe for being a Jew who believed in free markets and freedom. But it's something that I'm sure we all feel a lot. And one of the things we wanted to do in terms of the Tea Party Patriots was we wanted to check ourselves. We wanted to check to see how what we feel matches up with the American people. Are the threats we feel in terms of freedom slipping away felt by people beyond our own group? And so we did some intensive survey research to check ourselves and to see where we stood versus the American people. And the results were actually quite interesting and quite pleasing. And I'm sorry that I only have about 9 minutes because we have about 900 pages of data. I've condensed it into about 9 minutes. I'll do my best. And I just wanted to go over with you some of the key findings about how the American people view freedom. One of the things that we came up with is the idea of creating a freedom gap, measuring how important a particular freedom is to the people, how free they actually feel when it comes to that particular freedom, and seeing the gap between the two. And that's something we're going to continue to monitor, because I think it's very important to understand on a month-to-month basis how people see freedom slipping away. Because this was just the first snapshot. But I do want to see over a time period how the American people see these freedoms slipping away. So one of the things that we asked was, what are the words that best describe the American dream? This was an open-ended question. We just didn't give any answers. We let people answer themselves. As you can see, a majority of people, 23%, came up with the word freedom. And 8% came up with the word opportunity. Work hard, be rewarded is 4%. Equality, 3%. It was very good to see that the American dream among the American people is associated with freedom. And I can tell you from my experience, and I've been doing survey research for many, many years now, going back to the early 90s, when you ask an open-ended question, if you get a 10 or 15% response for the first answer, that's high. So that 23% answered it was a very significant response. We then asked the question of the following, which describes the American dream. And this we gave them the choices. And the choices were free to pursue your own dream, equal and free, be the best you can be, live, dream, thrive. These were some of the messages we wanted to try and test. And you can see that some of the demographics that I broke up, liberal, moderate, conservative, even among the entire population, it was about 39%. Among conservatives, it was 44%. But even among liberals, 35% said that the American dream represents the freedom to pursue your own dream. And so when we talk about that, as Tea Party Patriots, we say we believe in the freedom to pursue your own dream, that is a message that resonates with a broad majority of Americans. Now, some may see it getting there a different way than we do, especially on the left, but they do understand that, to some degree, that if you're free to pursue your own dream, that's the basis of the American dream. Now, we asked the question, would you say that you are, this is a few interesting questions, are you more free or less free, or have about the same freedom as your parents did when they were your age? And these results were very interesting. 48% of the entire sample, and I should tell you that when we do a sample, it's a national random sample, but it is likely voters, it's people who are both have a history of voting and who self-identify as being likely to vote. 48% of the people around the country said that they're less free today than they were when their parents were their age. And interestingly enough, you'll see some of the demographics, of course, conservatives and GOP voters at 66, 67%. People who are favorable to the Tea Party are at 73%. But some of the interesting demographics that I want to look at are, for instance, independents. Independents, 54%, higher than the overall average, think they are less free today than their parents were when they were their age. It's a very significant number for us as an organization. If you look at the people who have the last column on the right, people who have no opinion of the Tea Party, and this is an important group of people because they're people who say they don't know enough about us. 51% of them feel they're less free today than their parents were when they were their age. So this was very significant at a first glance, understanding that the American people do feel less free today compared to when their parents were their age. Now, we asked this, I was interested to know if they tied regulation to freedom. And so we asked a similar question, that does the government regulate more of your daily life or less of your daily life, or about the same as when your parents were your age? Now, look at these numbers. Everyone, even liberals and Democrats, say the government regulates more of their daily life than they did when their parents were their age. Now, this is a real problem. There's a disconnect. There's a disconnect among the public between regulation and freedom. These two graphs show that very clearly. They absolutely know that there's a lot more regulation, and yet not enough people feel less free. So part of our job as an organization will be to help people understand how regulations affect the American dream and freedom. It's one of the key findings from the survey. And this was the freedom gap I told you about. So we asked voters' opinions about various freedoms. We were asked them to rank that freedom on an importance scale of 1 to 10. And then we asked them on a similar scale of 1 to 10, how real do they actually feel about that freedom? And the gap is the difference between the two. So the freedom to be treated equally under the law. On a scale of 1 to 10, on average, 9.57 was the ranking of how important that freedom actually is. And on the average, only 7.11% said that freedom actually existed. So there's a gap of about 2.46. Now, again, what I want you to look at is how some of these numbers compare to some of the key demographics we're looking at, like independents, like moderates, people who don't have an opinion of the Tea Party patriots as of yet. And you can see that the gap kind of lines up pretty similar. Let me show you some other ones. Freedom to practice the religion of your choice without government interference. This is a very important freedom, 9.5, yet the gap here is smaller. People still feel that there's a real reality here. Now, there's a bit of a disparity between the people who are favorable to the Tea Party as opposed to the rest of the nation, not a terribly large gap. And so this is one of the freedoms that people don't feel as of yet is really being taken away or slipping away. There is still a small gap, and we're going to continue to monitor that gap. The freedom to express your political beliefs without the fear of government reprisal as through an IRS audit. This was fantastic. I mean, it's terrible, but in terms of the data, was very insightful. Look at the freedom gap, 2.5, almost 2.5% between how important it is and how much that freedom actually exists. And look among independents. In fact, 2.63 of independents say that there's a big gap between how important this freedom is and how free they actually feel they are. This is a huge issue. And of course, I wish we would have had this data a year ago to compare to today, but we're going to continue, as I said, to monitor these freedom gaps and see how this is affecting people. But again, we do see that there's a disparity between how important the freedom is and how real they actually feel that the freedom exists. Freedom to live our lives as we see fit, as long as we are not harming others. Interestingly enough, this gap was a bit smaller than some of the others. It was ranked a little lower, 9.34, and only 7.45% of the overall people asked thought that it was a reality. So there was a gap of a little less than 2%. And this, again, is something that I think we have to do on our part in terms of education of voters, because we know this is something that's really real. It's a real freedom that's slipping away. The American people don't feel it as of yet. People outside of our sphere. The freedom to start a business. Again, it's interesting. You can see that the overall number, far left column, was 9.07. It was a bit lower in terms of the rank order, the importance of the freedom, yet there still is a small freedom gap of about 1.5% overall. Interesting enough, the larger gap, of course, was among conservatives and independents. Again, this is a number that I worry about, and that the gap isn't as large as it should be. People, again, we have to educate people that some of these freedoms, in terms of regulation, are hurting the freedom to start a business. So this was very important for us as an organization as to where we should do some messaging. Check out this one. This was one of the better ones. Freedom from politicians to only serve their own interests instead of the public's interests. Yeah. This was by far the largest gap. Now, I can tell you, I don't have this slide, there are other surveys we've done where a majority of Americans, more than 50%, actually think that term limits for members of Congress and that should be limited to 8 years or less. It's a big, big issue, and it's a winning issue for us. And so we should not be afraid to challenge people who've been in office for too long, who may have an R next to their name, but aren't voting the right way. The American people are with us on this issue. They do believe that there's a huge gap between the politicians and us and the people. And so by going after politicians who've been there for too long, we're on the side of the vast majority of the American public. Look at liberals and Democrats even. They agree with us that we need to get rid of these incumbent politicians who've been there for too long and have forgotten why they're there. Whoops. We go back. Freedom to choose your own doctor. This one worried me a lot. And I will tell you that in some of the other data that we've done, and I don't have a lot of time, we have seen that people are not yet fully feeling the effects of Obamacare. They don't equate the law with it being personally threatening to them. And that's one of the reasons that we see a small gap here. I know we'd all like to see a larger gap, and I think, unfortunately, we'll all begin to see a larger gap as time goes on. But this was one of the areas in the other data that I have that was very clear that the problem here is that people aren't personally affected by it enough yet. There's not a panic yet. Like I said, sadly, that will probably come, but we have to do our job as an organization and make sure people understand how dangerous this really is, because they don't see it as a problem in terms of their freedom yet. The freedom to choose where your kids go to school, I will tell you that as small as this gap looks, we've done other data, research, and the idea of eliminating the Department of Education or bringing education curricula back to counties scores very, very, very well. So this issue for us in terms of education, we all believe that one of the fundamental elements of a successful society is education. We have to take education away from the federal government. And the American people are on our side with this. And I can tell you throughout all the data that we have done, we have seen over and over again support for bringing the decision-making back to the local level, even to the counties. Don't applaud me, applaud the American people. Freedom to defend your own property. People don't see this as a real threat just yet. I know we all worry about things like eminent domain and stand your ground laws and all of that. By and large, most people, other than people on the right side of the political spectrum, don't see this as a real threat. And you can, in fact, see with liberals and moderates and Democrats, there's no gap. And again, so this is a place where we have to focus in terms of education, helping people understand that this is a freedom that's slipping away because they really don't feel it just yet. Freedom to speak on the phone without the government listening. Yeah, right. Less government, more fun, absolutely. You can see the gaps here, and in fact, look at the independents. I mean, there's a huge gap, freedom gap among independents. Some of these issues that have been affecting the Tea Party patriots and other conservative groups are really resonating with independent voters. They see some of these abuses of power really as a problem and a problem of freedom, which is key for our success. And so, as bad as this is for us, it's a wake-up call to many of the people and many of the voters that we're going to need in the 2014 and 2016 election cycle. Whoops. Next one, please. Freedom to send an email without the government monitoring. Same thing. Big freedom gap here. And by the way, even to some degree, liberals agree that there's a gap. Moderates who are very left of center in this survey by more than 2% see a gap. And so we, again, I'm reiterating from the previous slide, the abuses of power are resonating to some degree with the American public. Not enough. I would like to see these gaps much larger in terms of how people actually feel, but it is having an effect, and especially among key demographics. Again, independents and people who do not have an opinion of us yet. I keep harping on that, and I apologize, because my job is to try and get votes. And so I'm looking at where the opportunity is to grow and to make sure the candidates that we support are the ones that get elected. Freedom to choose the curriculum for the curriculum that your kids learn. Again, you can see overall there's a gap there. and it's not an unimportant gap. But again, when we tested specifically the idea of eliminating curriculum coming from for instance, Common Core, we tested Common Core, and we tested the idea of national government-sponsored curriculums. People are against that. They absolutely want education back at the local level. I do fear, though, a little bit that they don't see it as an abuse of freedom, and that's part of our challenge, is to make sure they understand that as an abuse of freedom. Freedom to own the firearm of your choice. This was interesting to me. The rank was actually pretty low, 7.29%. In terms of the rank order of importance of everything else we tested, the right to own a firearm ranked the lowest. Doesn't mean it's not important to these people, but the idea of things like government intervention, government spying, big government, politicians that don't represent our interests, those issues, those big picture issues, are more important in terms of the freedom gap than gun ownership. And I thought this was a fascinating slide. I included it mainly because I just found it so interesting that they didn't see this as the biggest problem to freedom. I like this slide. It doesn't have to do exactly with freedom, but its position on the Constitution. We asked people, do they think that the Constitution is a timeless document or old and outdated document? I'm happy to report that 83% of the American people think the Constitution is a timeless document. That's a good thing. Now we just got to get 72% of the liberals who agree with us to enforce what they already think, which is that it's a timeless document that should be listened to and admired, and we should have our government officials adhere to it. This is a very interesting slide. There's broad support for the Constitution being a timeless document. We have to educate people what that means in terms of realpolitik. I think this shows that there's a huge disconnect, even on the left, who admires the Constitution, but they don't adhere to it at all. And so we have a lot of work to do. These numbers look very good, but there's a danger here in that people agree with us broadly, but they don't see the cause and effect. And so we have a lot of education to do. I think that was, here, term limits. This is one I wanted to show you. Term limits. How long should an individual be allowed to serve in Congress? Look at the number, 8 years or less. That was the #1 response. It was over 63%, but even among liberals, don't have my glasses, 49%, I think it says, or 43%, agree that members of Congress should serve 8 years or less. Again, if you look, though, at the independents, and you look at the people who don't have an opinion of us, and this is where my mind goes in terms of the next election cycle in 2016, they want to throw the bums out, just like we do. And so I believe firmly that a lot of what we do at the local level should be educating constituents as to how long an individual has already been in Congress. Because, you know, the old saying, oh, I throw out all of Congress but keep my congressman. This cuts against that, and we've tested this specifically against people in terms of their own members of Congress and own senators. Once they know, in fact, I can give you a little bit of insight. Once they know, for instance, even moderates and independents in Illinois, when they find out Dick Durbin's been in the Senate for 30 years, his numbers among that group drop off tremendously. There are a lot of people we may not think of as being vulnerable in this coming election cycle that are absolutely vulnerable if we let the citizens know just how long they've been in office, and, by the way, tie it to how large the debt has grown since they've been in office. When you have a guy like Dick Durbin, who since he's been in Congress 30 years ago, went from $1 trillion to $17 trillion, let me tell you something, even moderates don't like to hear that. And so a lot of these people are going to be vulnerable. Our job as an organization is to educate people to some degree how long a lot of these members have been in Congress. The people are on our side with this. So this is something that as we go into the next election cycle in 2016 at a local level, we should scream at the top of our lungs when we're trying to take out these incumbents. People don't want them there anymore. They want to get rid of them. I think that's it. I went way over. I apologize. Thank you.